and one by one he vanquished them all. And then he opened the box, and said that, to console them, he would show them the portrait of his Queen of Beauty, and when he did so, every one recognized the Princess Graciosa. The unknown knight then saluted her gracefully, and retired, without telling his name to anybody. But Graciosa had no difficulty in guessing that it was Percinet. As to the queen, she was so furiously angry that she could hardly speak, but she soon recovered her voice, and overwhelmed Graciosa with a torrent of reproaches. "What," she said, "do you dare to dispute with me for the prize of beauty, and expect me to endure this insult to my knights? But I will not bear it, proud princess. I will have my revenge." "I assure you, madam," said the princess, "that I had nothing to do with it, and am quite willing that you should be declared Queen of Beauty." "Ah, you are pleased to jest, popinjay," said the queen, "but it will be my turn soon." The king was speedily told what had happened, and how the princess was in terror of the angry queen, but he only said, "The queen must do as she pleases. Graciosa belongs to her." The wicked queen waited impatiently until night fell, and then she ordered her carriage to be brought. Graciosa, much against her will, was forced into it, and away they drove, and never stopped until they reached a great forest 100 leagues from the palace. This forest was so gloomy, and so full of lions, tigers, bears, and wolves, that nobody dared pass through it, even by daylight. And here they set down the unhappy princess in the middle of the black night, and left her, in spite of all her tears and entreaties. The princess stood quite still at first from sheer bewilderment, but when the last sound of the retreating carriage died away in the distance, she began to run aimlessly hither and thither, sometimes knocking herself against a tree, sometimes tripping over a stone, fearing every minute that she would be eaten up by the lions. Presently she was too tired to advance another step, so she threw herself down upon the ground, and cried miserably, "Oh, Percinet, where are you? Have you forgotten me altogether?" She had hardly spoken when all the forest was lighted up with a sudden glow. Every tree seemed to be sending out a soft radiance, which was clearer than moonlight, and softer than daylight. And at the end of a long avenue of trees, opposite to her, the princess saw a palace of clear crystal, which blazed like the sun. At that moment a slight sound behind her made her turn around, and there stood Percinet himself. "Did I frighten you, princess?" said he. "I come to bid you welcome to our fairy palace, in the name of the queen, my mother, who is prepared to love you as much as I do." The princess joyfully mounted with him into a little sledge, drawn by 2 stags, which bounded off and drew them swiftly to the wonderful palace, where the queen received her with the greatest kindness, and a splendid banquet was served at once. Graciosa was so happy to have found Percinet, and to have escaped from the gloomy forest and all its terrors, that she was very hungry and very merry, and they were a gay party. After supper they went into another lovely room, where the crystal walls were covered with pictures, and the princess saw, with great surprise, that her own history was represented, even down to the moment when Percinet found her in the forest. "Your painters must indeed be diligent," she said, pointing out the last picture to the prince. "They are obliged to be, for I will not have anything forgotten that happens to you," he answered. When the princess grew sleepy, 24 charming maidens put her to bed in the prettiest room she had ever seen, and then sang to her so sweetly that Graciosa's dreams were all of mermaids and cool sea waves, and caverns in which she wandered with Percinet. But when she woke up again, her first thought was that, delightful as this fairy palace seemed to her, she could not stay in it, but must go back to her father. When she had been dressed by the 24 maidens in a charming robe which the queen had sent for her, and in which she looked prettier than ever, Prince Percinet came to see her, and was bitterly disappointed when she told him what she had been thinking. He begged her to consider again how unhappy the wicked queen would make her, and how, if she would but marry him, all the fairy palace would be hers, and his one thought would be to please her. But, in spite of everything he could say, the princess was quite determined to go back, though he at last persuaded her to stay 8 days, which were so full of pleasure and amusement that they passed like a few hours. On the last day, Graciosa, who had often felt anxious to know what was going on in her father's palace, said to Percinet that she was sure that he could find out for her, if he would, what reason the queen had given her father for her sudden disappearance. Percinet at first offered to send his courier to find out, but the princess said, "Oh, isn't there a quicker way of knowing than that?" "Very well," said Percinet, "you shall see for yourself." So up they went together to the top of a very high tower, which, like the rest of the castle, was built entirely of rock crystal. There the prince held Graciosa's hand in his, and made her put the tip of her little finger into her mouth, and look toward the town, and immediately she saw the wicked queen go to the king, and heard her say to him, "That miserable princess is dead, and no great loss either. I have ordered that she shall be buried at once." And then the princess saw how she dressed up a log of wood, and had it buried, and how the old king cried, and all the people murmured that the queen had killed Graciosa with her cruelties, and that she ought to have her head cut off. When the princess saw that the king was so sorry for her pretended death that he could neither eat nor drink, she cried, "Ah, Percinet, take me back quickly, if you love me." And so, though he did not want to at all, he was obliged to promise that he would let her go. "You may not regret me, princess," he said sadly, "for I fear that you do not love me well enough; but I foresee that you will more than once regret that you left this fairy palace, where we have been so happy." But in spite of all he could say, she bade farewell to the queen his mother, and prepared to set out. So Percinet, very unwillingly, brought the little sledge with the stags, and she mounted beside him. But they had hardly gone 20 yards, when a tremendous noise behind her made Graciosa look back, and she saw the palace of crystal fly into 1,000,000 splinters, like the spray of a fountain, and vanish. "Oh, Percinet," she cried, "what has happened? The palace is gone." "Yes," he answered, "my palace is a thing of the past. You will see it again, but not until you have been buried." "Now you are angry with me," said Graciosa in her most coaxing voice, "though, after all, I am more to be pitied than you are." When they got near the palace, the prince made the sledge and themselves invisible, so that the princess got in unobserved, and ran up to the great hall, where the king was sitting all by himself. At first he was very much startled by Graciosa's sudden appearance, But she told him how the queen